What's up, guys? This is Mr. Stark again with a brief lesson on how ground fault circuit interrupters work. So in my other video, whether you saw it first or you're going to see it after this video is irrelevant, I talk about how ground fault circuit interrupters work, and there's really a lot of theory that goes into how these mechanisms actually do their job to protect us from incidental current in a circuit. So what I'd like to do first is at least present this brand new in the box. So you get a, ground fault circuit interrupter. Typically you'll get something in a box like this, and then the receptacle will also be in there. And you'll also have instructions, which obviously is important because Article 110.3 in the code book requires us to make sure that we read all the applicable manufacturer's instructions so that we can properly install it according to their installation instructions. So you got a couple sets of those, and nice plate, finished plate. You've got two 632s that come with the Gfci, which is really nice. But there's a couple things I wanted to cover on this. So if we get a good close-up shot of this, we see the Gfci. We've all seen these before. They've got a test and a reset button on them. And on this particular one, you've got lights. So the two little dots left and right in the middle of the receptacle. One will be green if it's reset and on, and then the other one will turn to red if it's tripped, and then the button will pop out. So I'm telling you stuff you already know, but in addition to that, what I'd like to mention is for new guys, when they're installing them on the back, it says line and load. Now you may or may not be able to see that. Line means feed, load means what you're trying to protect with the ground fault circuit interrupter circuit. So it could be other receptacles that leave this box that are tied into the load that then become ground fault circuit interrupted protected. So if I wanted to put my two small appliance branch circuits for the countertops, I put one Gfci to the left of the sink, one Gfci to the right of the sink. I have a 20 amp circuit that feeds this one. I have the other 20 amp small appliance branch circuit that feeds the other one, and then I come off the load side of these to regular receptacles elsewhere on the countertops or in other areas of the kitchen, dining, pantry, and similar spaces that also need to be part of that small appliance branch circuit. If I want them to be ground fault circuit protected, they would be on the load side, and really we got to go by the code, so let the code tell us where they go. So when I look at this ground fault circuit interrupter, the first thing I'm thinking about is guys are normally tying circuits in and they splice wires all together and they add tails. So your conventional way of wiring something is you would take two blacks, tie them together, put a tail, go to the receptacle. And every time we get a student that hasn't wired one of these in a while, they do the same thing and they end up wiring it wrong, or they put the wires in the wrong place. So what I want to present and explain more thoroughly is, if you're looking at my drawing right here, the wire that comes from the panel that comes into that GFI, the feed has to tie into the line. So I use blue to represent the white wire, black to represent the black wire with the brass screw being the black dot. And then anything that I want to be controlled by the Gfci is on the load side. So let's say I plug in a piece of equipment down on this regular receptacle. Plug it in. Now that piece of equipment is ground fault circuit protected. That load has to physically go through this device. And there's a current sensing device for simplicity that's measuring what's leaving and what's coming back. So in my other video, I just gave the hypothetical example. If I have 5 amps that leave, the neutral has to return with 5 amps. If there's a 4 to 6 to 8 milliamp difference in that current coming back, it's going to allow this to open the circuit. And we talked about that as being leakage current. So if 5 goes out and 5 doesn't come back, if 4.5 came back, then half of a current is somewhere else in the circuit. And we don't want that, because if it's somewhere else in the circuit, it could be on you if you touch something. So that's the whole purpose of these ground fault circuit interrupters, They have to, anything that's on the load side of the device has to go through this so it can be sensed, so it can trigger if it sees leakage current and then make its way back home. In addition to this picture, there's a couple other things that I put on here that kind of add to the illustration. A lot of people don't realize that what side of the plug is what. The small slot is hot. The small slot is hot. And, you know, I've got a way of remembering that that's probably not that appropriate, but the small slot is hot. The big slot is not, which would be neutral. Not starts with N starts with neutral. And I threw in a couple of code articles in here just because I felt they were appropriate. 14 gauge wire. Unless it meets the exceptions in mostly Article 430 and 440, 14 gauge wire has to be tied onto a 15 amp breaker unless it meets the exceptions. Most of them, which I said, are in 440 or 430. The article that says small conductors for this is 240.4D3, 14 gauge wire and a 15 amp breaker. I wanted to throw that in there again, as well as any other articles that are on this wall, to reiterate where to look. So circuit breakers are found in overcurrent protection, 240. Your standard circuit breaker sizes are 240.6A. And then panel boards are found in Article 408. And receptacles, and I'm going to get to this in a second, receptacles is Article 406. So in addition to what's in the box, when you buy a new ground fault circuit interrupter, there's a pile of stickers. And these stickers are extremely important if you're taking out, if you're replacing receptacles in somebody's dwelling. And you have to realize if there's an equipment grounding conductor or if there isn't an equipment grounding conductor in the box. And the code covers that. And when you meet the requirement of receptacle replacement, you're obligated by the manufacturer and the code to make sure that you put the sticker on, the appropriate sticker on the faceplate. And these stickers really say anything from GFCI protected to no equipment ground. And you can kind of probably see this better than me. I don't have my glasses on. But when we're in code, I'll explain this a little bit better. And what I want to show you is where this is found in the code book. This particular code book is an old edition, but the code hasn't changed. But I just want to show you, you go to Article 406, receptacles, cord connectors, and attachment plugs. And you're going to go to 406.4D, replacements. And there they mention if it's a grounding type receptacle, if it's a non-grounding type receptacle replacement, GFCI, arc fault, tamper resistant, and all the others. It's probably a good idea to get this code in your head, whatever article edition that you're looking at, so that you're aware that when you're out there making a little bit of side money for people, that you take into account that tamper resistant receptacles, arc fault type receptacles, or GFCI receptacles are required to be put in many different areas in dwelling units. It's pretty rare when you're putting in a regular receptacle in a dwelling unit as a replacement, because you don't know what's behind the box until you take the receptacle off and see if there's an equipment grounding conductor in there. There's a lot of variables in the code that require you to know this stuff before you just start swapping out receptacles. But that's for another lesson. That's more for code. To reiterate on this again, which goes along with my video that I simulated with regular tap water versus distilled water, we have these at wet and damp locations. This $3 receptacle is now GFCI protected, and we only had to buy one $15 to $20 GFCI receptacle. And now I can have any amount of these on the load side of that and be protected. And the feed goes to the line. Line stands for feed. Load is anything that leaves beyond that point that you're trying to control or energize. So hopefully this lesson's helped a little bit, you understanding that there's more to just plugs and receptacles than you realize. And my other video on the water and the ground fault will show the theory behind it. Thanks again, and I'll see you at the next lesson.